Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, this is your second to last flip. I'm trying to emotionally prepare myself for the fact that we won't be seeing each other anymore, and like this will be the end of my first Western Civ class ever at Chappelle. But you know what? It's okay because like with all this craziness going on, I think what we really need right now is some time off. It's some time away from school, it's some time to like recuperate, heal a little bit, and move forward. So let's go ahead and get into the actual nitty-gritty era that is referred to often as World War II. Now, this, remember, is a crash course. I could teach you at length about this. You could theoretically have an entire class, and I could easily teach an entire class in college on the world wars, right? Like just the world wars. Like there's no question in my mind that would be very, very possible to teach an entire class on just these two subjects, right? And I'm trying to cram the entirety of World War II into a small series of flips, right? So one big thing I suggest that is if you find this stuff interesting, using this as a basic outline, go once the pandemic kind of calms down and everybody can kind of get out again. This summer, I'm going back again. I know you should go to the World War II Museum in New Orleans and really kind of take what you learned from here and apply it to it and be like, oh, well, this makes complete sense because it gives it an overarching timeline to work with, right? So, because a lot of people don't realize how Hitler broke the Treaty of Versailles multiple times going into the war. A lot of people don't realize their rises to power. They don't understand that, like, he gave them jobs in the youth organizations and he suppressed the rights of women and he created enemies for them, and like he preached an ideology of hate, and then of course Mussolini did the same, and then ironically enough one of our allies, Joseph Stalin, also did the same, right? So a lot of if we were in class together right now, I would love to be able to be like, all right, well, we call these guys the bad guys, but then what about this guy who did some similar stuff, but he was our ally, right? Old Uncle Joe is what we refer to as Joe Stalin. How come we don't go after him a little bit, right? Maybe that'll be one of your final short answer questions. Debate me a little bit. Should we have supported Joseph Stalin? Yes or no? Because in the long run, today, you're going to see how the Russians at the same time are the reason why Hitler ends up losing World War II, all right? So, it's a very, very multi-sided, complex, devil's pitchfork kind of situation, all right? So, getting further into it, though, let's go ahead and get after it. So, we're now entering into the first phases of World War II. How do I grab myself? Wait, no, that's not going to work. Hold on one second. Escape. All right, so sometimes this, there we go. Sometimes this my poodle spilled a cup of water on my computer, so I'm currently using a loaner MacBook Pro from school, but it's going to be okay because we're getting into it now. All right, yep, can I move myself now? There we go. Okay, cool. So we're now getting into the first phases of World War II, the actual phases, because as we know, World War II started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invades Poland. Now, this is after Germany annexed Austria, annexed the Sudetenland, and then also annexed Czechoslovakia. So as you can see, Germany is growing in size, right? The Allies are like, that's our last straw. You can't invade Poland. You signed an agreement with them and with us saying that you would let them remain neutral because they're a baby country. They've only been there for 20 years, right? So you can't do that. And so what's going to happen post-September 1st, 1939, is you're going to see the Axis powers fall into place, right? The Axis powers including Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, they weren't as formally formed as the World War I alliances, right? The World War I alliances were a little bit more kind of formed with a deliberance, right? Otto von Bismarck formed the League of Three Emperors, hoping to protect the newly formed German Empire from invasion from either side, or also from jealousy of other empires and other countries growing as their industry grew, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, as we know, that fell apart because Russia and Austria couldn't agree on how to control the Balkans. Now, then that was formed with deliberance, but then, of course, it fell apart with deliberance. And then Kaiser Wilhelm forms one with Italy, Austria, and themselves, right? The Central Powers, because they were in the center of Europe. You have to understand the Axis powers was formed over a series of different treaties and a series of different moments. One of them is in the academic PowerPoint slide project, which is called the Pact of Steel. Now, if I have time, I will be making a short how-to flip on how to do that project. It seems that a lot of people are kind of confused. And also, honors girls, heads up, your essays are now going to be due on Saturday because I'm going to send an email out because, again, there also seems to be some type of confusion. But it's going to be okay. I'll send an email out. Do not worry. We'll talk then, okay? So anyway, biggest thing going forward, though, Germany, Italy, and Japan form the Axis powers. The allies are France and Britain. But whoa, what do you mean just France and Britain? Where's our guy? Where's Russia? Where's the Soviet Union? They were like one of the big reasons why the Allies were able to split the German forces leading into success in World War I. Where are they at? Oh, well, in 1939, August 23rd, 1939, right before Hitler invaded Poland, they signed a non-aggression pact with Germany. Some of you are going to be like, what are you talking about? We're jumping around all over the place. No, we're kind of jumping like right before the lead up to World War II, so you can understand why Hitler was so successful in his initial military expeditions with Mussolini at his side, right? So you have to understand that the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was huge, also known as like the Molotov like I can never say the German ambassador's last name. I can't do it. It's like whatever. I'll look it up later. So anyway, now the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, as it's colloquially known as, was signed October 23rd, 1939 between the Russian and German powers. The idea was that they were going to, if a war started, split up Poland. You know that country that just got there after World War I? They would split up Poland, half would go to Russia, half would go to Germany, right? And then they would trade industry goods from Germany, like steel and war materials and things like that, for grains that were coming from Russia, of course, off of these now giant collectivized farms that Stalin is running. And I don't know, he's letting people starve in his country, but he's going to make sure that he trades grain with Hitler for tanks, right? So, and also, here's the biggest key component of the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. You cannot aid the enemy of another side. If a country gets into a war, they were not allowed to aid the enemy of their non-aggression pact person. So, for example, when they got into war and Britain and France declared war on Germany September 1st, 1939, after they invaded Poland, which ironically enough, if you pay attention to the dates here, the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was signed just 9 days earlier. Hitler knew what he was doing the entire time. This man, like, literally had this laid out in a plan for a long time. We'll show you, like, how we knew that. But getting into it, that's saying that the Soviet Union cannot aid France or Britain, their old allies, during this war. This non-aggression pact effectively takes the Soviet Union out of the equation, right? So the better answer is, or also, this freed up the Soviet Union to do what they really wanted to do, which was to fight Finland. Yeah, there was a short war at the beginning of World War II between the Soviet Union and Finland. And I'll throw a couple of pictures up here real quick. This minor editing real fast, but like it's called the Winter War, and it was crazy. And like the Soviet Union won in the long run, but the Finnish put up a crazy intense defense of their country using soldiers on skis, which I find to be insanely cool. They used the winter terrain of Finland to navigate successfully, deal major blows to the Soviets, and they actually stretched this war out quite a bit. And they were able to kind of hold their own for a little while before effectively losing to the Soviet Union and losing 11% of their territory to Soviet gain control. My favorite story about the Finnish is about this guy. I can never say his name, but his nickname is the White Death. He's a sniper with over 200 Soviet kills on his record. He would actually sit in the snow in his camouflage and wait for Soviet soldiers to pass by and just peg him off. And then also, not to mention the fact, like, he's a major hero to the Finnish in this war, and then he would sometimes sit there for days on end eating snow to stay alive. The White Death. What is his name? The White Death. Simo Hayaha. Oh, wow, yeah. But he's a really cool figure, right? The White Death. So the Winter War was, like, being fought by the Soviets at the very beginning of the World War II. So that means they're effectively taken up, and the United States is going to be neutral? What the heck? The only thing that the Allies can really bank on right now is Hitler really screwing up and having a terrible idea. But here's the question. Did the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and sort of Japan. Japan was just kind of like in this alliance to make sure that everyone was understanding of they wanted the same government of an authoritarian state. They wanted the same territorial and imperial gains as each other wanted. Because think about it. Hitler wants to invade multiple territories, and he's an authoritarian leader. Mussolini has already started to invade multiple territories, those of North Africa, right, and Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and he's an authoritarian leader. Hirohito, the emperor of Japan, authoritarian leader, using his guy Tojo Hideki, trying to invade other areas nearby. So they share a commonality of belief, right? But the question is did Germany and Italy learn from World War I? Did they pick up any things from World War I to prevent a devastatingly disgusting 10 million death war from occurring again? Which World War II is going to kill a lot more people than that, but like, it's a devastating thing we'll talk about in the next flip. But yes, they definitely learned from World War I. And the biggest thing that Hitler learned was the use of his Blitzkrieg, also known as the Lightning War. Blitz meaning lightning and Krieg meaning war in German, right? So the Blitzkrieg, also known as the Lightning War, hinges on one particular idea. This is to avoid trench warfare, right? Because some people always ask, like, well, if World War I was in trenches, then why wasn't World War II in trenches? This doesn't make any sense. Well, a lot of it has to do with the opening phases of the war, right? The opening phases of World War I had two key battles, the Race to the Sea and the First Battle of the Marne, where the Germans dug the first trenches that would eventually grow into a 440-mile-long expanse of trenches, right? Those two battles set the tone of the war. So Hitler tries to set the tone of this war with his Blitzkrieg. Now, to avoid that stalemate, to prevent anyone from digging in on trenches, he would use new military technology, including heavily armored tanks, heavily armored vehicles, and planes with rapid bombing to actually aggressively and quickly attack. And the idea was that it would do a lot of damage, and you would be able to effectively rush in as fast as possible and take over large swaths of land, right? The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, quick strikes. And this, of course, is the biggest component of it. This is the Luftwaffe, right? Those are German Spitfires is what they're called. The Luftwaffe was the biggest thing about running bombing raids, right? All over different areas. And this right here is some of the devastation that was seen following Blitzkrieg attacks. This is in Great Britain. So, like, moving forward, though, this was an extremely effective method. Hitler's method of the Blitzkrieg was extremely effective, okay? Now, due to practice mostly, all right? It's due mostly to practice. You have to understand, because the Germans and the Italians, they used these tactics during the Spanish Civil War. So from 1936 to 1939, leading up to the invasion of Poland, the Germans and the Italians aided Francisco Franco in his takeover of Spain. Francisco Franco is kind of like, he's known as a Francoist. He's a little bit more of a military dictator, less an authoritarian, well, yeah, he's still an authoritarian dictator, but he's a dictator all the same. Don't worry about that. Let's not be like, oh, this is an egg and that's a brown egg, right? Let's not like split hairs right now. So Francisco Franco took over Spain, and he called on the aid of the other authoritarians in the area, Italy and Germany. And Italy and Germany were happy to help because they were going to be able to practice these Blitzkrieg tactics. And they used them against the Spanish in their Spanish Civil War, aiding Franco's faction, okay? So, Franco's faction, sounds like a crappy restaurant. Anyway, but going forward, though, that's where they got this practice. Now, keep in mind, really fast, do me a favor, Spain declares itself neutral as well. They were not ready to fight a world war following an intense civil war that claimed the lives of a lot of their military, so they declared themselves neutral. But the Germans and the Italians got what they wanted, practice of the Blitzkrieg techniques, right? And the other thing about it is a lot of historians believe that the Blitzkrieg was to cause psychological and physical damage, right? It was supposed to break your will to fight from both a civilian and a military level, and it was supposed to cause physical damage, like in the picture that I just showed you 2 seconds ago, all right? So now, it's a very intense practice, and it's very insane, but here's the other thing. We got 2 spheres to this whole war. We got the European sphere, and then we got the Pacific sphere, right? The Pacific sphere out in Eastern Asia, of course, where Japan is, because the Japanese began to invade the surrounding islands around their island, and also other major Asian countries, including China, of which they have already invaded, right? Like, they are fighting in the middle of the Second Sino-Japanese War. So they're invading and pushing further into China, committing atrocities the entire way. Then they go and invade French Indochina, which is, of course, Vietnam. This is effectively going to get the Allies involved in the Japanese sphere of the war because French Indochina belonged to France, right? And you went and invaded a French colony. So, and they plan to invade all the surrounding islands, which belong to other European powers, which is going to lead to December 7th, 1941, a little bit later on, but we'll get there. All right, so and here, of course, is a map of Japan's territorial expansions. Now, I know some of you are like, you went too fast. Well, rewind it like 10 seconds, pause it, write it down. But as you can see right here, this is Japan's large-scale invasion of continental Asia, and as well as you can see that they're invading areas of Korea, and then they also invaded French Indochina. They went all the way down to Nanking. They invaded Hong Kong. They invaded the islands right here, and they plan on expanding throughout the Pacific, and we'll talk about that stuff later. That'll be right at the very end of the flip, all right? But let's keep going. Now, Hitler's biggest goal, his ultimate biggest goal, right? Why is he doing this? What is his method to the madness? Why does he want to get Austria and Czechoslovakia, and why does he care about gobbling up all this here? Why does he want Poland? Why does he want half of Poland? Why does he want this stuff? Well, it's due to a doctrine that he believed in known as Lebensraum, right? Lebensraum means living space, okay? There's an old doctrine from the early 1900s, not invented by Hitler, but invented by another German philosopher, saying that German people were becoming crowded within their country, that the German sphere, the German country itself, as you can see right here, was not territorially large enough for the German people, so they needed more space. As you can see, looking at it right here, he's trying to claim that the Germans are packed in a square mile almost double as much as France and Great Britain are. Frankreich oder England. Oh, sorry, I love the German language, as you know. All right, so the idea was to continue to territorially advance across most of continental Europe in the hopes of resettling that land with German farmers and forcing everybody that had originally lived there to turn into basically a slave to that German society. All right, so as you can see, Hitler and the Nazi ideology was not ruthless only to the Jewish community. It was ruthless to Eastern Europeans, to Slavic people, to anyone that wasn't this idea of their German heritage race. Now, I could for days get into why Finland is not involved in this map, but I don't have time. And also, as disgusting as it sounds, I don't particularly have enough time to go in depth into an analysis of the Holocaust. But I do know Miss Hook runs an amazing class that every girl should take while they're at Chappelle, no question, all right? So if you're super interested in that, definitely sign up for that elective with Miss Hook. She blows it out of the park. She does an amazing job. Just quick shout out, Miss Hook. So anyway, going further into it, so Lebensraum, living space, right? Germany wants to grow its territorial advances, and they want to resettle it with German farmers and turn all the people that lived there at one point into basically workers on German farms. Now, the Germans are going to use the Blitzkrieg, that lightning war against Norway and Denmark out the gate. But then a crazy move happens. Then they start using it against France. What was the big foul-up of World War I? Take France out early, go focus on Russia. The Schlieffen Plan, as we know, failed completely. The Schlieffen Plan was a miserable failure. Alfred Schlieffen dies in 1913, says use 90% of the forces, and then Hindenburg and Ludendorff are like, 75 will be fine, and it doesn't work, right? And they end up in a stalemated two-front war. Hitler learned from World War I, okay? So he decides, I'll take Russia out of the war by signing a pact with them. Then I'll attack France. See, this is not what a lot of people realize. A lot of people don't know that France was the initial target of Hitler and that the Soviets were not involved in the earliest phases of the war because they were busy fighting a war in Finland. Now, in May of 1940, Winston Churchill is going to be elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Now, this is going to be a major event. A major event, okay? Because in May of 1940, with Winston Churchill's election to Prime Minister, he is going to replace, he is a huge figure. He is going to replace the men that came before him, including, I think it's Lord Tennyson, and, not Lord Tennyson, who is the guy that came before him? I can't remember. Neville Chamberlain. No, not Neville Chamberlain. Is it Neville Chamberlain? Yeah, I think it's Neville Chamberlain. All right, so the two guys that came before him, I'll remember their names later on. The two men that came before Winston Churchill were staunch conservatives. And the idea was they believed in making peace accords with the Germans. The guys that came before Churchill were the ones that were like, oh, it's okay, Nazis, you can build your armor up even though it says you're not supposed to. Oh, it's okay, Nazis, you can remilitarize the Rhineland. The guys that came before Churchill were the appeasement people. Appeasement, make sure you know that word. The people that gave in to Hitler's demands. Churchill was having none of that. Churchill said, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat in the defense of liberty, right? So Winston Churchill is, let us go forward together. He is a figure with his election because he had been speaking out against the rise of Hitler and the Nazis the whole time. For the years that preceded World War II, he was always saying, our next frontier will be fighting Hitler and the Nazis in their own homeland. He also had other famous quotes like, the Soviet Union is going to fall behind an iron curtain. Like, he's a huge figure, major figure. And he's the reason why Britain did not give in to Hitler's demands and let him keep taking over areas of Europe. Because without Churchill, they may have surrendered early on. They may have not kept fighting because he was an experienced politician, an experienced soldier that fought in World War I, and he was a wartime leader, right? Like, you have to understand, we shall never surrender was a quote of his. He was never going to give in. He would fight tooth and nail to the very, very end to make sure that Britain stood up to the Nazi threat in continental Europe. So one of his initial things was, we need to go help France. We got to go help France. They're being invaded by the Nazis. So the Nazis start using the Blitzkrieg methods. They rush through Belgium, they rush through the Netherlands, and they're heading into France full force. Now, the Belgians and the Dutch are able to hold them back for a certain amount of time, and the French are able to hold them back for a certain amount of time, but then the British show up, and the British are having major engagements with the Germans outside of a very important city known as Dunkirk. All right, so now Dunkirk is right here. But as you can see, the Nazis' Blitzkrieg tactics were unknown to the groups of Europe, had never been seen before, and were overwhelming European forces. And remember, the United States is still neutral, still not involved. And this is in 1940 that this is all happening. So, the Nazis then surrounded the Allied forces at the port of Dunkirk. Now, nobody really knows why, but following the surrounding, Hitler stopped. He just went yink, and he just held the perimeters. And he sent his Luftwaffe in to bomb this entire area, okay? He did not keep advancing, and he did not take out their entire group, but this is going to lead to the evacuation of Dunkirk, all right, in May of 1940, also known as Operation Dynamo, all right? So, which was an unprecedented moment in World War II, because unprepared to fight the German military, the British and the French evacuated over 360,000 troops. Keep that in mind. That's 1/3 troops, right? Off the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France. And it was an insane event because they were being attacked the entire time by the German Air Force. They had to use not only naval vessels, but also civilian fishing ships, known as little ships, that sailed over the English Channel to pick them up and get them out of there. And was this a miracle that it worked out, or was this Hitler's plan the whole time, right? So some historians argue that Hitler wanted them to evacuate so he could take that beachhead and start setting up defensive positions. Other historians argue that this is an absolute miracle, that as many civilian fishing boats showed up as they did. There's a phenomenal movie on the entire evacuation of Dunkirk. It's called Dunkirk. It's by Christopher Nolan. It's very good stuff. I highly recommend it. Now, unprepared, though, to fight the German military, the Brits and the French evacuated. Now, I'm not talking about the entire French population. That's ludicrous. That's millions of people. That's the dumbest thing. If you thought the entire country of France emptied out and the Germans were just walking around in nothingness, like that's ludicrous, right? So the French military, though, thousands of them evacuate at Dunkirk as well. So this is a major event. So now you've got French troops that are in Great Britain. They're stuck in Great Britain with nowhere to go. Because following the evacuation of Dunkirk, this is a crazy thing. Germany and Italy invade France full force. Italy comes in from the south, Germany sweeps in from the north, and using the Blitzkrieg tactics, the British were unable to assist them, right? So they're being bombarded, they're being taken out. And the British feared gigantic losses of their military. Now, it might have been one of their better decisions. Britain was unable to assist out of fear of devastating losses. The Nazis are going to push south, and France surrenders to the Nazis on June 22nd, 1940. Hitler accomplished what the Germans wanted to do in World War I the entire time. Take France out fast, right? Like, take them out quick. And he does it in a matter of a few months. He goes in there and he takes over the entirety of France, right? He takes over Paris and they surrender. This is Adolf Hitler sitting in front of the Eiffel Tower, you know, like, just hanging out in Paris, right? Like, so, and this is pictures of Nazis right here, like, eating outside of a French cafe. They were able to go in there and they took over France completely. Now, when France surrenders, this is a crazy thing that's going to, like, take 2 seconds to explain. You have to understand, they split France into two different sections. They split it into Vichy France, which was down here in the bottom, okay, and then northern Nazi-occupied France, right? So this area was, like, in the surrender of France, the French government, which was a mess leading up to this whole thing. If you took my AP Euro class, we talk, like, extensively about the rise of communism in France, the fear of communism in France, Blum, Pétain, like all these other guys. You have to understand, though, northern France was going to be occupied by the Nazis, because that's what Hitler wanted the whole time. Why did he want it? So he could set up a giant defensive position on this border, of course bordering England to the north, preventing a direct continental invasion by the British, right? So when he took out France, he just wanted this northern half. So when he made this agreement, he told the French government, he was like, fine, you can have a free zone. Vichy France is the free zone. The French government is allowed to operate there. However, you must reduce your army to only 100,000. Your boats have to stay in their ports, and you cannot aid Britain in any of this. Oh, and, like, you may or may not be enlisted into the German army or into the German workforce. No big deal. So, like, the German occupation of France was a major one, because who is our only ally left now? Who is our only ally left now? Who is our only ally left now? It's just Great Britain. Really, it's just Great Britain. In the U.S., still uninvolved. Still uninvolved. Still won't get involved, right? So with the occupation of France, Hitler gained all of French West Africa's territories as well. So the Nazis have now gone into Africa. They now control all of North Africa. Good old imperialism backfire, right? Because if you take over one country, you basically gain their territories as well. So he just gained all of French West Africa. So you can't really come at the British the British can't really come at France from the south, because you would have to go into North Africa to get there, right? Which is now held by Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the German general. And then Hitler's creating a continent that will be almost impenetrable by British attack, right? So with the occupation of France, he gains all of their West African territories as well, and many French Vichy soldiers actually ended up fighting with the Germans too, mainly out of hate. They were like, I don't like communists, and then they join up with the Nazis and fight with them. It's a very messy situation, and if I had enough time, I would then be able to explain to you the rise of Charles de Gaulle and, like, his leadership of France and things like that, but I don't. So the Allies are going to now be just left with Britain. And Russia, of course, isn't attacking anybody, because because Stalin and Hitler have this non-aggression pact, right? They're like, I won't fight you if you don't fight me. That just means that that's the only ones left. So how does Hitler try to take out Great Britain? He starts this thing called the Battle of Britain. Now, here's the thing, though. You can't directly land invade Britain. It's an island. They're ready for that. Their navy is big, and you cannot do that. Hitler also knows this. He's like, if we try to directly land invade Great Britain, they'll destroy us. Their navy is superior. They've, like, the Dreadnought-class warships they've had for over 100, not 100 years, that's aggressive, for years and years and years. They beat us in the Anglo-Naval arms race. They are prepared for a land invasion. We can't do it. So he decides to begin an air raid campaign, and this is known as the Battle of Britain. From July to October 1940, the Germans begin a huge air raid campaign, bombing the daylights out of Britain, targeting churches and monuments and factories and like famous institutions and all these other things, trying to break the will of Great Britain. Now, I know, and to quote John Green right now, I know that we know the Nazis lose, right? Like, looking forward, it's like some of y'all, if you're on the edge of your seat right now, and then what happens next, Mr. Terry? I mean, you know Germany loses, like, eventually. But imagine being in this situation. Imagine being in the Battle of Britain, and you're hiding in subway tubes, and you're hiding in, like, underground, and you're hiding while the Nazis are bombarding your city continuously, killing civilians and the leftover French and British military in the capital cities and the larger cities, and targeting your areas of industry, and targeting, like, churches, like your national monuments. They could have surrendered. Had it not been Churchill there, or had he not bolstered the feelings of morale for the British people, they could have surrendered. I know we know the Nazis lose, but, like, imagine being there. This looks like a win. This looks like an absolute win for Hitler. Like, this looks like there's no way he can be stopped. Look, everything in khaki right there, light and dark brown, is controlled by the Axis. They've taken over almost the entire continent of Europe and a huge chunk of northern Africa, right? Like, that is terrifying. And this was the outcome of the Battle of Britain. This is what it looked like after the Battle of Britain air raids. You've got people's homes destroyed, factories destroyed, schools destroyed. This is the Old Bailey. That's the French. That's not the French. That's the English civil court system building. It's one of the most famous, iconic buildings in their country, and it looks almost exactly like the American Capitol building. I know. So they're all designed off the St. Peter's Dome that Michelangelo built. And this is a direct picture of Nazi bombers flying over London. So as you can see, the Battle of Britain was a terrifying moment. And the Axis powers then adopt more allies. They bring in Hungary, and then they bring in Romania and Bulgaria, who join up with them as well, because they want authoritarian leadership and they want to be a part of this big, giant, growing ideology of hate, which is disgusting, right? Like, that's another thing too. Like, a lot of these other countries, Italy, Hungary, Romania, they also committed many of the same atrocities against the Jewish population and the undesirables that the Nazis did as well. Hungary didn't do it under the Nazi Party. They did it under this thing called the Red Cross Party, or the Red Arrow Cross Party. Romania did it as well. It's like a very, 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 very trying time, because people will jump on a bandwagon in a minute, right? So, speaking of this bandwagon, though, then Hitler pulls a fast one. You would think that looking at that, he would be satisfied. You'd be like, all right, we need to just stay the course. We'll be fine. Hitler was arrogant, though. His downfall is going to be his arrogance, all right? And he's arrogant because what does he do? What does he do? At the end of 1940, keep in mind the month, look at the month, October 1940, it's starting to get cold outside. He decides to break the non-aggression pact and invade the Soviet Union directly. You're telling me you didn't learn from Napoleon that you never, ever try to engage in a land war with Russia heading into the winter, right? So dumb. Because, like, about a year goes past and he soups his army up, right? And in June 1941, he decides he's going to head into Russia, and he breaks the non-aggression pact. And in June 1941, he built his army up even more, and he starts heading over there in a thing called Operation Barbarossa, right? So now, well, actually, not technically. He had his own little stupid idea. Now, anyway, so look, he then decides to push into Russia. Biggest turning point, biggest reason he lost, biggest reason why the Nazis end up losing is because you were stupid. You never try to invade Russia directly by land, because that's their home country. It's the biggest one in the entire world, and they're going to prevent you from taking their major cities. What are you thinking? You're so dumb. Now, so not trying to say that I wish that he would have done better. I'm just calling a dumb man, right? So, like because I hate him with a fiery passion. He's the worst person in all of history. Well, one of them. So, anyway, now, there we go. So, yes, the Germans and their allies were able to sweep through Eastern Europe. Okay, look, let's not, get overzealous really, really quickly. Look at this pink area. So, you see the blue? The Germans swept in through that area hard, right? They took over this pink area very, very quickly. And a lot of early successes for the German Empire. Or the German, that's World War I. For the German, army. They swept in through Eastern Europe. They took over Ukraine, Latvia, Belarus, all these other areas. But the Soviets were able to hold them and stop them at several key major cities, including Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad. This is still Germany's biggest mistake, because the second they held them up at Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad, here comes Russian winter, right? So, the Russian winter showed up, and it slowed their advance down, and the Nazis spend, write this down, the Nazis spend 3 years trying to take the cities of Moscow, Stalingrad, and Leningrad. Now, I wish I could go further into this understanding of all this stuff. I don't have that kind of time. All right, so anyway, but we will get into it more a little bit later. So during this entire process, 26 million Soviet citizens will die at the hands of the Axis powers, particularly the German army, during this invasion, which is, oh wait, no, that's wrong. Ignore that. Ignore this little same number that died in World War II. That's not true. 85 million people died in World War II altogether. So ignore this last, that's a typo. Now, 26 million people will die. And there was a lot of really screwed up things too. Like Hitler would hold literacy tests, and if you could read, he would have you shot. And if you couldn't read, you'd have a good chance of living. So he could turn you into these non-German farm slaves that he was talking about on this Lebensraum campaign, right? So during this whole thing, it's still a turning point, though, because the ability to hold it back, the Russian winter is coming, and, yeah, Himmler, eat it. All right, so, that's Heinrich Himmler, his leader of the SS. I hate that guy. All right, so, anyway, now, he's such a... And then this is them actually looking into a Russian POW camp. Now, joke's on you, dude, because give it about 3 years, and this guy's going to be punching you in the face. All right, so, anyway, and here comes the U.S., though. Oh, yeah, notice that time. Notice that time. June 1941, he tries to go and invade Russia. And then it doesn't line up well with the timeline because on December 7th, 1941, a mere 6 months later, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, right? So now the big question, though, a lot of you have seen the movie, which is terrible. A lot of you know the story. You know that it was an air raid, and it was targeted at our largest port on the western, our Pacific fleet. It was targeting our Pacific fleet because they were all in harbor, because, again, we were a neutral country. We were not involved, right? So, but why? Why would they do this? Why? So, and I know some people are probably watching this thing right now, and they're like, wow, Mr. Terry, you didn't get into the Lend-Lease Act. You're just now bringing the United States up. You're going to learn all about that stuff with Miss Palladino next year because she is a stud and she teaches World War II like it's nobody's business. All right, so, but I'm trying to give you the overall perspective, mostly the European perspective. All right, so now, and here comes the U.S. following the attack of Pearl Harbor. We enter into the war following December 7th, 1941. But why did the Japanese attack us? What was the point? Now, the big reason why happens to be the fact that the Japanese wanted to try and stop our involvement in their expansion in the Pacific, okay? So, let's look at well, first of all, let's take a second to look at all these pictures. These pictures are ridiculous. These are actual pictures from the bombings at Pearl Harbor, and yes, there is some footage from the bombings at Pearl Harbor. You can go look those up. I'll hit some links down in the description below, and it's an absolutely terrifying event in American history that caused, calamity and an absolute huge American response to a large-scale attack on our soil, which had not happened up until this point ever since the Revolutionary War, or the War of 1812. So anyway, this is the biggest reason why. Because Japan wanted to expand their sphere of control into all these islands out here, okay? They wanted to control the Marshall Islands, Guam, the Philippines, which belongs to the United States as a territory. They want to go into New Guinea, and then they also want to go into the Solomon Islands and Guadalcanal and all these other areas, right? So when they wanted to expand, they knew they had to take out the American Pacific Fleet that was harbored and anchored right here to slow our response. Because they knew if they started taking over places like the Philippines, which belong to the United States as a territory, they knew for a fact, here comes the United States full force with their entire Pacific Fleet that the Japanese had no chance of stopping, right? Because remember, the war is going to get really lopsided. America, Britain, and Russia tripled the industrial output of the Axis powers. Tripled it, right? So that's why Japan wanted to hurry up and attack Pearl Harbor, because, if we take out all their vessels, it will slow their response time. It'll give us enough time to build up our industry to create as much goods to hold them back, right? So that's why. The Japanese took a bet that they shouldn't have took, where it's the United States is going to get involved eventually. That was a bad bet. You shouldn't have done it. But we're going to stop right there for this flip, and then we're going to finish up this crash course on World War II tomorrow. All right, so I'll talk to y'all later. Y'all have a good one.